Oh, hello, good evening and welcome. Been a while, hasn't it? Sorry about that. What are we doing today on the 20th of January, 20th of April 2020? I've been tasked by a friend with presenting a little lecturette. I'm actually going to do it in two parts, and tonight we'll do part one. I'll probably do part two tomorrow. Why am I doing it today? Well, because it started drizzling and I've stopped gardening. Okay, the subject. The person that asked me to do this is doing some work on various celebrations that various people do, and we are approaching rapidly St. George's Day. St. George, 23rd of April every year, St. George's Day. And I think why I was asked, I think, I could be wrong, is because there's a risk that I will give this a slightly different feel to the way that other people might talk about St. George. St. George is the patron saint of many, many things. Bulgaria, Georgia, the Bulgarian army, there's a thing. They celebrate it on a different day, but there we are. But he is patron saint of England. And at this time of year, every year, there are various people in England who say, we want a public holiday, we should celebrate our saint. You know, the Scots celebrate St. Andrew and the Welsh celebrate St. David, and the Irish, boy, do they celebrate St. Patrick. And in England, well, we do celebrate St. George, but perhaps not as much as some people would like. So, St. George. Let's roll this back a little bit. Some of you aren't comfortable. I know this from conversations I've had with various people. Some of you aren't comfortable with the idea of celebrating saints and having statues of saints and things like that. And some of you challenge one of my neighbours is playing his French hunting horn. I can hear it in the background. We'll carry on anyway. He's a lovely chap, and I'm not going to go and tell him to stop just because I'm making a video. Saints, I think we ought to just take a look at what we think a saint is. And we need really to go back 2,000 years. We need to talk a little bit, not a lot, about Christianity, the Christian church. Because of course saints relate to those people who have followed Christ, who have been judged by Christ to be worthy of being accepted into what we could call heaven or paradise or sitting at God's right hand, all sorts of different phrases we can use for that. And many of you will say, yeah, that's right. If you've led a very good life, if you followed Christ, if you are judged by Christ himself to be worthy, you're a saint. Now, there's a little difficulty with this, because when somebody is judged by Christ to be a saint, we don't get postcards from them. You know, I'm in heaven, wish you were here, incidentally, I've been judged to be a saint. We don't get that sort of information. So whilst I'm ready to accept that everybody who is so judged is a saint, we need to think a little bit about how we decide that we can use that title for somebody. If you imagine someone that has lived an exemplary life, followed the Ten Commandments, they were charitable, they fed the naked, the hungry, they clothed the naked, they visited the prisoner in prison. Incidentally, those of you that know your scripture will know that those are part of the sort of judging processes that we're taught. It is still possible for that person, when they are being judged by Christ, to be found wanting. So we, as humans, we've watched someone's life, we've seen them baptised, we've seen them go to confirmation classes, we've seen them help old ladies across the road, we've seen them demonstrate huge degrees of patience with people that don't deserve it perhaps. We think, yep, if anybody's a saint, that person is. But of course the judgment isn't ours. So why is it then that I'm comfortable calling Saint Paul a saint? How do I know? How do I come to accept that Paul is a saint? How do I know that at the last moment he didn't sort of renounce everything and say, you know what, I'm going back to my old ways? The church, the organised church, looks at how they investigate people's lives. They look to see if there are attributable miracles to that person. Not easy, not easy. There is a process by which the Roman Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, the Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox churches sit down and inquire into somebody's life. Now, this sort of means if you're going to do any research about saints, you really are going to need to read stuff published by, sorry about this, the Roman Catholic Church. They investigate, they record, they search histories, they investigate attributable miracles. And after that investigation, a process is gone through, and eventually the Pope will say, this person I am willing to canonise, I'm willing to say publicly, this person is a saint, has been judged to be a saint, not by the Pope, not by me certainly, but by Christ. In recent years we would think perhaps of Mother Teresa of Calcutta. I don't think there's anybody who would disagree that she was a wonderful, wonderful woman. She did fantastic works. She sacrificed, in effect, her life. She gave up her life to serve other people. And then the church investigated to see whether we can accept that she is indeed a saint. Bernadette Soubirous, Saint Bernadette. You know, that's the little girl who saw the vision of the Immaculate Conception at Lourdes. Yep, the authorities in Rome, the Pope, agree that Bernadette, we can call her Saint Bernadette. So, here's a funny thing. The granting of the title Saint here on earth to a person is within the gift of the Pope or the other leaders of the Greek Orthodox. And we accept in England that St. George is a saint. We name pubs after St. George. In England you will find pubs called George and the Dragon. Comedians have told terrible jokes for many, many years. You know, they went round to see their mate. They knocked on the door and the man's wife opened the door and said, "What?" And the chap says, "Oh, excuse me, is George in?" Suggesting that the lady herself is perhaps the dragon. We know the story of George and the Dragon, and yet here's the thing. We actually don't know that story. When I get into the second part of this lecturette, we'll have a little look at the history of St. George. One of the things that upsets me is many of the people that crack on about St. George and St. George's Day, and they will say, "Well, England is a Christian country," and you say, "Okay, England's a Christian country, is it?" Well, of course it is. England isn't a Muslim country, it's not a Jewish country, I would suggest it isn't exactly a Christian country, but you know, people tell me this, and you say, okay, so you want to celebrate St. George. Yep, he's our patron saint. Makes you proud to be English. So why St. George? I'll answer that tomorrow. England, in the first instance, you can't really call England England until the 600s. It became known as England after the Angles arrived and settled in East Anglia. And the Angles and the Saxons ruled what we think of as England. And at the same time, there were evangelical missions being sent by various church bodies, including the Pope. And England was visited by a great many people who we recognise and celebrate as being saints. We might think of St. Cuthbert, or St. Ced, or St. Bede. My favourites, St. Erkenwald, St. Audrey. English people, St. Patrick. Everyone thinks of him as the patron saint of Ireland. He was an Englishman, St. Patrick. We might look at the lives of these people and think, wow, these are great, wonderful people, and their lives are documented. There are histories of their lives. There are histories that show us who their mother was, who their father was, where they were born, the day, the year, the month that they died, what they died of. They were real people. We've got the church records, the records of various popes who've commissioned inquiries and looked at the lives of these people and said, that man is a saint. We have other saints in England. St Edmund. I discussed this subject this morning with a priest. If you want to talk about saints, always good to check with a priest. And we discussed St Edmund, and I said, well, St Edmund, you know, he was one of the English kings. He died the death of a martyr. He's buried at Bury St Edmunds. They spent a lot of time thinking up the name for that town. And the priest I was speaking to said, well, yes, but St Edward the Confessor has the better claim. St Edward the Confessor wasn't an English king, he was a king of England. There's a difference. St Edward the Confessor, recognised by church authorities, canonised, was the patron saint of England. There are many people who say he still should be, but we think of St George as being the patron saint. Why? Well, because that's what history tells us. History, myth, rumour, Shakespeare. I never really thought about St George until I was studying Shakespeare at school, and there's a wonderful, wonderful speech in Shakespeare's play about Henry V, where Henry V, in his armour with his cask on his head, his sword in his hand, shouts, "Cry God for Harry, England and St George." So I knew that St George was the patron saint of England. I knew that the flag of St George is a white flag with a red cross on it. I knew that St George slayed the dragon. More of that later. And then somebody asked me to talk about St George. Well, of course, I checked what the Roman Catholic Church says about St George. And I'm going to cover that tomorrow.